The rope fibers bit into Hannah's fingertips as she worked them into tight braids, her hands moving with practiced precision, even as blood seeped from the fresh cuts on her weathered skin. She sat on an overturned crate behind the general store in Clifton, Arizona Territory, the late afternoon sun of 1882 beating down mercilessly on her threadbare bonnet. Each completed rope earned her 3 pennies if she was lucky, sometimes only 2 if Mr. Henderson at the mercantile decided the quality wasn't up to his standards that day. Hannah Calloway had been braiding rope for 8 months now, ever since her father died from consumption and left her alone in a territory that had little use for unmarried women without family or fortune. At 22 years old, she should have been married by now, settled into a home with children underfoot, but life had dealt her a different hand. Her father's medical bills had consumed what little savings they possessed, and the small plot of land they'd worked had been claimed by the bank before his body was even cold in the ground. The sound of hooves on packed dirt made her look up briefly, just long enough to see a tall figure dismount from a dust-covered horse near the hitching post. She returned her attention to her work, fingers moving in the rhythm she could perform in her sleep now. Over and under, pull tight, twist, repeat. Her back ached from hunching over, and her stomach growled with a hunger she'd grown accustomed to ignoring. "That's fine work," a male voice said, closer than she'd expected. Hannah's hand stilled, and she looked up into a face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. The man was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of honey in sunlight. He had the lean, muscular build of someone who spent his days in the saddle, and his clothes were dusty from travel, but well made. A cowboy, clearly, though there was something different about him, something in the direct way he met her gaze that made her sit up straighter. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly, dropping her eyes back to her work. Men didn't usually speak to her except to complain about the price of rope, or to proposition her with offers that made her skin crawl. "How long does it take you to make one?" he asked, not moving away as she'd expected. His boots remained planted in her line of vision, worn leather covered in the red dust of the territory. "Depends on the length. This one's about an hour's work." She kept her voice neutral, professional. If he was going to buy, she'd be polite. If he was looking for something else, she'd learned how to make men lose interest quickly enough. "And what do you get paid for an hour's work?" Hannah's hands paused again. It was an odd question, too personal, too interested. 3 pennies if the quality's good." The cowboy crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level. This close, she could see his face clearly. He had a strong jaw covered in a few days' worth of stubble, and those unusual amber eyes held something she couldn't quite name. Curiosity, maybe, or concern. "That's robbery," he said flatly. A bitter smile tugged at Hannah's lips. "That's survival, sir. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to finish this before sundown." "Austin Quinlan," he said, offering his hand, "and I don't think I will excuse you just yet." She stared at his outstretched hand, rough with calluses but clean, the hand of a working man who took pride in himself. Slowly, she wiped her bleeding fingers on her already stained skirt and placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and firm. "Hannah Calloway." "Miss Calloway, how much would you need to earn in a day to keep yourself fed and housed properly?" Heat crept up Hannah's neck. "I don't see how that's your concern, Mr. Quinlan. Humor me." His tone was gentle but insistent. She pulled her hand back and returned to braiding, though her movements were less steady now. $2 a day would be a blessing. $1 would keep me from going hungry. As it is, I make maybe 20 cents if I work from sunup to sundown, and that's assuming Mr. Henderson doesn't find reason to pay me less." Austin was quiet for a long moment, and Hannah wished he would just leave. She didn't need pity, didn't need some cowboy seeing her shame and thinking he could solve her problems with a few kind words or, worse, with the kind of offers she'd refused from other men. "I've got a proposition for you," he finally said. Hannah's jaw tightened. "I'm not that kind of woman, Mr. Quinlan, and if you think—" "I own a ranch about 10 miles north of here," he interrupted, his voice taking on an edge. "The running queue. Been working it for 3 years now, and I've built it up from nothing to something respectable. I've got a dozen hands working for me, good men who work hard and get paid fair wages. But I need rope, Miss Calloway. Lots of it. Bridles, reins, lariats, hobbles, the kind of quality work I can see you're capable of." Hannah's hand stilled completely now. She looked up at him, searching his face for signs of deception or mockery. "I don't understand." Austin settled into a more comfortable crouch, clearly prepared to stay until he'd said his piece. "I'll pay you $1 per rope, regardless of length. You come out to the ranch. I'll set you up in the spare room in the main house where my housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, stays. You'll take your meals with us, and you'll have all the materials you need provided. In exchange, I need you to produce enough rope work to keep my operation running." It was too good to be true. Hannah had learned that lesson hard enough times to be wary. "Why would you do that? You could buy rope anywhere for less." "Because the rope I buy from the general stores breaks too often and costs me more in the long run. Because I've watched you work for the past 10 minutes, and I can see the quality in every twist and turn. Because I'm not a man who likes to see skilled labor undervalued." He paused, his gaze steady on hers. "And because something tells me you deserve better than bleeding fingers and starvation wages behind a general store." Hannah wanted to say yes. The word sat on her tongue, sweet and desperate, but years of hard living had taught her caution. People will talk. An unmarried woman living on a ranch with an unmarried man. Mrs. Rodriguez is a formidable chaperone, and she lives in the house full-time. The bunkhouse is separate, and my men know to be respectful or they'll find themselves looking for work elsewhere. Besides, Miss Calloway, let me be direct. People are already talking about you. I've heard the whispers in town about the orphan girl braiding rope in the alley. At least at the running queue, you'd have a roof over your head and food in your belly while they whisper. The truth of his words stung, but Hannah couldn't deny them. She looked down at her hands, at the blood, and the rope fibers embedded in her skin, at the calluses that had formed over the past months. She thought of the tiny room she rented above the saloon, where the noise kept her awake most nights, and the walls were so thin she could hear every sordid transaction in the neighboring rooms. She thought of the constant hunger, the fear of winter coming, the knowledge that she was one illness or injury away from complete destitution. "When would I start?" she asked quietly. She heard the smile in Austin's voice before she looked up to see it. "How about right now? Pack whatever belongings you have. I'll settle your account at the boarding house and we'll head out before dark. I can pay my own debts, Mr. Quinlan. I'm sure you can, Miss Calloway, but consider it an advance on your wages. You'll work it off soon enough if that makes your pride feel better." Hannah set down her half-finished rope and stood, brushing the dust from her skirts. She was tall for a woman, nearly 5'8", but Austin still had several inches on her. "I don't have much to pack. Give me 20 minutes. I'll wait right here." As Hannah walked toward the boarding house, she could feel Austin's eyes on her back. She didn't let herself think too hard about what she was doing, didn't let herself question the strange twist of fate that had brought this man to her at this moment. Instead, she climbed the narrow stairs to her rented room and gathered her few possessions into a worn carpet bag. 3 dresses, all faded and patched, undergarments that had seen better days. a hairbrush that had been her mother's, a small Bible with her family's names written in the front, a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. She changed into her least stained dress, a gray cotton that had once been a pretty blue, and pinned up her dark hair more neatly under her bonnet. When she looked at herself in the cracked mirror above the wash basin, she saw a thin face with sharp cheekbones, dark circles under green eyes, and lips chapped from sun and malnutrition. Not pretty anymore if she ever had been. Just tired and worn like everything else in her life, Mrs. Garrett, the boarding house keeper, barely looked up when Hannah returned the room key and explained she was leaving. Austin had already paid what she owed, plus an extra week's rent that Mrs. Garrett had no intention of refunding. Hannah didn't argue. She just picked up her carpet bag and walked out into the fading sunlight where Austin waited with his horse. "That everything?" he asked, taking her bag and securing it to his saddle. "That's everything." Austin swung up onto his horse with easy grace, then extended his hand down to her. "You can ride behind me. It's not far." Hannah hesitated only a moment before taking his hand and letting him pull her up. She settled herself behind the saddle, acutely aware of how close she was to him, how she had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep her balance. He smelled of leather and sage and honest sweat, and the warmth of his body cut through the chill that was beginning to settle as the sun sank lower. They rode out of Clifton at an easy pace, heading north into the hills. Hannah watched the town disappear behind them and wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or finally catching the break she'd been praying for. "You're quiet," Austin said after they'd ridden for about 20 minutes, "just thinking." "About what?" Hannah wasn't sure why she answered honestly. Maybe it was the anonymity of speaking to his back instead of his face. Maybe it was exhaustion. "About whether you're real or if I'm going to wake up still sitting behind that general store." Austin's back moved with his quiet laugh. "I'm real enough. And stubborn as hell, my foreman would tell you. Once I set my mind on something, I see it through." "And what exactly have you set your mind on, Mr. Quinlan?" He didn't answer right away, and Hannah found herself tensing, waiting for the truth to reveal itself. Finally, he said, "I've set my mind on building something that lasts, a ranch that means something, and good rope is essential to that. Everything else is just details." It wasn't quite an answer, but Hannah let it go. The landscape was changing around them, the rocky hills giving way to grassland dotted with cattle. The air smelled cleaner out here, away from the dust and smoke of town. She let herself relax slightly, her tired body swaying with the horse's rhythm. The running Q Ranch appeared as the sun touched the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. It was bigger than Hannah had expected, with a solid-looking main house built of adobe and wood, a large barn, a bunkhouse, and several other outbuildings. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures, and she could see men moving about their evening tasks. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, and the smell of cooking food made her stomach clench with hunger. Austin rode up to the house and dismounted, then helped Hannah down. Her legs were shaky from the ride and she stumbled slightly. His hand steadied her strong and sure. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he called toward the house. "We've got a guest." The door opened and a stout Mexican woman in her 50s stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. She took one look at Hannah and her expression shifted from curiosity to understanding to something almost maternal. "Dios mío, child, you're thin as a rail. Come inside, come inside. Austin Quinlan, you bring her bags." Hannah found herself ushered into a warm, clean kitchen that smelled of beans and cornbread and roasted meat. Mrs. Rodriguez sat her at a sturdy wooden table and immediately began filling a plate with more food than Hannah had seen in weeks. "You eat," she commanded. "We talk after." Austin set Hannah's carpetbag by the door and removed his hat. In the lamplight, Hannah could see him more clearly. He was handsome in a rugged way, with laugh lines around his eyes and a mouth that looked like it smiled often. He caught her looking and smiled now, confirming her assessment. Mrs. Rodriguez runs this house with an iron fist, best just to do what she says. I heard that, boy. But Mrs. Rodriguez's tone was affectionate. She turned to Hannah. You're the rope maker, yes. Austin told me he might bring someone back. Hannah nodded, her mouth full of the best cornbread she'd ever tasted. She tried to eat slowly, tried to maintain some dignity, but her body had other ideas. Mrs. Rodriguez watched with satisfaction, refilling her plate before it was even empty. She'll stay in the blue room, Austin said. And starting tomorrow, we'll set her up in the workroom off the barn. Plenty of light there and she'll have space to work. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Good. It's about time we had another woman in this house. Too much testosterone, not enough common sense. She fixed Austin with a stern look. You make sure the men know she's under your protection. Any disrespect, any trouble, they answer to you. Already planned on it. Austin poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching Hannah eat. She felt self-conscious under his gaze but was too hungry to stop. Miss Calloway has a skill we need, and she'll be treated with the same respect as any other worker on this ranch. More, since she'll be living in the house. After Hannah had eaten enough to make her stomach ache, Mrs. Rodriguez showed her to the blue room. It was small but clean, with a real bed covered in quilts, a washstand with a mirror, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the eastern pastures. To Hannah, who had spent the last months in a room barely bigger than a closet, it looked like luxury. Bathroom is down the hall, Mrs. Rodriguez said. We have running water thanks to Austin's engineering. Breakfast is at sunrise. You need anything, you come find me. My room is the one next to the kitchen. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Hannah sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process the sudden change in her circumstances. This morning, she'd woken on a lumpy mattress in a room that stank of alcohol and tobacco smoke. Tonight she was in a clean room on a working ranch with a full stomach and the promise of real wages. It seemed impossible. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Miss Calloway, it's Austin. May I come in? Hannah stood quickly, smoothing her skirt. Yes, of course. Austin entered carrying a wooden box and a bundle of fabric. He set them on the chest of drawers. Materials for your work. Different gauges of fiber, some leather strips, tools you might need. If there's anything else you require, just let me know. And these, he indicated the fabric bundle, are from Mrs. Rodriguez. She said you might need some clothes that fit better. They belonged to her daughter before she married and moved to Tucson. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. That's very kind. Tell her thank you. Austin nodded, but he didn't leave. Instead, he stood there, turning his hat in his hands, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Miss Calloway, I want you to understand something. I didn't bring you here because I felt sorry for you, though I'll admit your circumstances concerned me. I brought you here because I genuinely need your skills. You're not charity. You're an employee, same as any of my ranch hands. You'll work hard, but you'll be paid fairly and treated with respect. Is that clear? Hannah lifted her chin. Perfectly clear, Mr. Quinlan. And I promise you won't regret hiring me. I'll earn every penny you pay me. I have no doubt about that. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. In town, we should probably maintain formalities, but here on the ranch, the men call me Austin or boss. Mrs. Rodriguez just calls me boy when she thinks I'm being stupid. You're welcome to use my given name if you're comfortable with that. Then you should call me Hannah. He smiled, that warm expression that reached his eyes. Good night, Hannah. Good night, Austin. After he left, Hannah changed into a nightgown that was nearly transparent with age and washing, then slipped between sheets that smelled of sage and sunshine. She lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Men's voices from the bunkhouse, the lowing of cattle, the cry of a night bird, and underneath it all, a sense of safety she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. She thought about Austin Quinlan, about his amber eyes and his straightforward manner, about the way he'd spoken to her like an equal rather than a charity case. She thought about the warmth of his body when she'd ridden behind him, the steadiness of his hands when he'd helped her down from the horse. Then she pushed those thoughts away firmly. He was her employer, nothing more. She couldn't afford to complicate this situation with foolish, romantic notions. But as she drifted off to sleep, her last conscious thought was of how his voice had sounded when he said her name. Hannah woke to pale dawn light and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she was disoriented, then memory returned in a rush. The ranch, Austin, her new position. She sat up quickly, worried she'd overslept, but the angle of the sunlight suggested it was just past sunrise. She washed using the pitcher and basin on the washstand, marveling at the luxury of clean water that didn't have to be hauled from a communal well. Then she examined the clothes Mrs. Rodriguez had given her. There were 2 work dresses in sturdy cotton, one brown and one green, both far nicer than anything Hannah owned. They were a bit large, but nothing that couldn't be fixed with a belt or some quick alterations. There was also a warm shawl and a new apron. Hannah dressed in the brown dress, pinned her hair into a neat bun, and made her way to the kitchen. Mrs. Rodriguez was at the stove, and Austin sat at the table reading a newspaper, a cup of coffee steaming at his elbow. He looked up when Hannah entered, and his eyes widened slightly. "That color suits you," he said, then seemed to realize how personal that sounded. He cleared his throat. "I mean, it's good the clothes fit, more or less." Mrs. Rodriguez shot him an amused look and handed Hannah a cup of coffee. "Sit, child, eggs and bacon coming up." "Austin, stop making the girl uncomfortable." "I wasn't," Austin started, but Mrs. Rodriguez silenced him with a look. Hannah hid her smile behind her coffee cup. She liked the dynamic between Austin and his housekeeper, the easy familiarity that spoke of genuine affection. It reminded her of how things had been with her parents before her mother died, when her father would tease and her mother would scold without any real heat. After breakfast, Austin led Hannah to the workroom he'd mentioned. It was attached to the barn but separate from the main horse area, with windows on 2 sides providing excellent light. There was a sturdy workbench, shelves for materials, and even a comfortable chair. "I thought you could set up however works best for you," Austin said. "If you need anything moved or changed, just say so. I'll have one of the hands help." Hannah surveyed the space with growing excitement. It was perfect, far better than she dared hope. "This is wonderful, thank you. The hands will start bringing their equipment that needs new rope work. Priority is the items needed for daily work, but eventually, I'd like to replace everything. We've been making do with substandard gear for too long." He pulled a small notebook from his pocket. "I've made a list of what's most urgent." They spent the next hour going over requirements. Austin was organized and clear in his explanations, and Hannah appreciated his methodical approach. He showed her examples of what he needed, explained how the rope would be used, and listened carefully to her suggestions about materials and construction. "You really know your business," Hannah observed, examining a worn bridle. "Most ranch owners would leave this to their foreman." Austin shrugged. "My father believed a man should understand every aspect of his operation. Can't lead effectively if you don't know what you're asking of your workers." He paused. "Besides, this is my dream. Every piece of it matters to me. How long have you wanted to own a ranch? Since I was 10 years old and my father took me to work a cattle drive. We didn't have much. He was just a hired hand and we moved from ranch to ranch wherever he could find work. But I saw how the men respected a good foreman, how a well-run operation could prosper. I started saving every penny I earned, learning everything I could. When I turned 21, I had enough to buy this land. It wasn't much then, just scrub and rocks mostly, but I saw the potential. Hannah heard the pride in his voice and understood it. She'd seen that same determination in her father when he'd talked about their small plot of land, before the consumption stole his strength and his dreams. You've built something impressive. Getting there. Still a long way to go. Austin moved toward the door. I'll leave you to get organized. If you need anything, ask any of the hands. They'll help or find me. After he left, Hannah spent time arranging her workspace and examining the materials he'd provided. Everything was quality stock, better than what she'd been working with in town. She selected fibers for her first project, a replacement bridle for Austin's horse, and began the familiar work of braiding. Her hands moved with practiced ease, the rhythm soothing. As she worked, she could hear the sounds of the ranch. Men calling to each other, horses nickering, the ring of a hammer on metal from what must be a forge. It was so different from the town sound she'd grown accustomed to. The piano music and shouting and gunshots that had formed the soundtrack to her previous life. Around midday, Mrs. Rodriguez brought her lunch on a tray. Austin said you wouldn't want to stop working to come to the house, she explained. So I'll bring meals to you unless you want to take them in the kitchen. This is very kind, but I don't want to make extra work for you. Mrs. Rodriguez waved that away. PSH, what's one more plate? Besides, it's nice to have another woman around. Gets lonely being the only female with all these men. Even if they are good men, they're still men. Hannah smiled. How long have you worked here, since Austin bought the place? I was working at a hotel in town, and he came asking if I knew anyone who could keep house and cook. I said I'd do it myself if the pay was fair. He hired me on the spot. Mrs. Rodriguez's face softened. He's a good man, that one, fair and honest, works harder than any of his hands. Never asks them to do something he wouldn't do himself. He seems very dedicated. Dedicated, yes, but also lonely, I think. He's so focused on building this ranch that he forgets to build a life. Mrs. Rodriguez gave Hannah a meaningful look. A man needs more than land and cattle to be happy. Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm just here to make rope. Of course. I'm just an old woman talking. Don't mind me. But her smile suggested she didn't believe her own words after Mrs. Rodriguez left. Hannah tried to focus on her work, but the conversation lingered in her mind. She thought about Austin's hands, scarred and calloused from hard work. She thought about the way he'd looked at her across the breakfast table, quickly but with something in his eyes she couldn't quite interpret. Then she shook her head firmly. This was a job, a lifeline. She couldn't risk it by developing feelings for her employer. The afternoon passed quickly. Hannah fell into the meditative state that came with skilled handwork, her mind quiet and her hands sure. She completed the bridle as the light began to fade, and she was examining her work critically when Austin appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Rodriguez says supper's ready if you want to stop for the day. Hannah held up the finished bridle. I wanted to complete this first. What do you think? Austin took the bridle from her, turning it over in his hands, testing the strength of the braiding, examining the joins and knots. His face was serious, focused, and Hannah found herself holding her breath waiting for his verdict. This is excellent work, he finally said. Better than anything I could buy in town. How long did it take you? About 6 hours with breaks. I'll be faster once I'm more familiar with your specifications." Austin looked up from the bridle to her face. "At this rate, you'll have my entire operation re-outfitted in a few months. I might have to find other work for you to do. I'm sure there's always something that needs mending or making on a ranch this size." "True enough." He hung the bridle on a hook by the door. "Come on, you've earned your supper." They walked to the house together in the gathering dusk. Hannah was acutely aware of Austin beside her, of how his presence felt both comfortable and unsettling. She searched for something to say, some topic of conversation that would break the silence without venturing into dangerous territory. "Tell me about your hands," she said. "Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned you have good men working for you." Austin's face brightened. "I've been lucky in that regard. My foreman is Jack Murphy, been with me from almost the beginning, solid as they come. Then there's Miguel, Eduardo, and Carlos, 3 brothers from Mexico who know cattle better than anyone I've ever met. We've got Tom and Peter, a couple of drifters who settled here last year. Good workers, both of them, and a few others who come and go with the seasons. Do they know about me? About why I'm here? I told them we'd hired a specialist for rope work and that you'd be living in the main house. Anyone who has a problem with that can collect their pay and move on." His tone was firm, brooking no argument, "But I don't expect any trouble. These are decent men." Supper was a lively affair. Mrs. Rodriguez had laid out a feast of roasted chicken, potatoes, vegetables, and fresh bread. Austin filled his plate and ate with the hearty appetite of a man who worked hard physically, but he also had table manners that spoke of good upbringing. He passed dishes without being asked, said please and thank you, and included Hannah in conversation naturally. "How did you learn rope braiding?" he asked. "It's not a common skill, especially for a woman." Hannah wiped her mouth with her napkin. "My father worked for a freighter when I was young. One of the men taught me the basics when I was about 12 and I took to it. Had steady hands and patience," he said. "After my mother died, I helped my father by doing repair work for the freight company. It brought in a little extra money." "And after your father passed?" The question was gentle, but it still hurt. Hannah took a breath. "After he passed, I tried to keep working for the freighter, but he said he didn't have enough work to pay me a real wage. Mr. Henderson at the general store agreed to buy rope from me by the piece. It wasn't much, but it kept me alive." "Barely kept you alive," Austin said bluntly. "I'm sorry for your losses, Hannah, and I'm sorry that this territory didn't do better by you after." Hannah met his eyes across the table. "I'm not looking for pity, Austin. Good, I'm not offering pity. I'm offering respect. There's a difference." Something shifted between them in that moment, some understanding that went beyond employer and employee. Mrs. Rodriguez watched them with satisfaction, then stood to clear the dishes. "Hannah, you go rest. You've had a long day." "Austin, you help me with these dishes." "But I should," Hannah started. "Rest," Mrs. Rodriguez said firmly. "Tomorrow you work. Tonight you recover. Go." Hannah knew better than to argue with that tone. She said good night and retired to her room, where she spent time altering the second dress to fit her better. Her hands moved automatically with needle and thread while her mind wandered. She thought about Austin's words at dinner, about respect versus pity. She thought about the way he'd looked at her work, really looked at it, seeing the skill and not just the product. She thought about how safe she felt here, how different everything was from just 24 hours ago. A knock on her door interrupted her sewing. "Come in." Austin entered carrying a lamp. "I saw your light was still on, wanted to make sure you had everything you needed." Hannah set down her sewing. "I have more than I've had in a very long time. Thank you." Austin shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncertain again. "Hannah, I want to ask you something, but I don't want you to feel pressured. If the answer is no, it won't affect your position here at all." Do you understand? Hannah's heart rate picked up. I understand. Tomorrow's Sunday. I usually ride out to check on the north pasture in the morning, then take the afternoon to rest, maybe raid or work on the ranch accounts. I was wondering if you'd like to ride out with me. I could show you more of the property, and you could see where the cattle graze. It would help you understand the ranch better, which might inform your work. It was a reasonable suggestion, a logical extension of her position. So why did it feel like something more? Hannah studied Austin's face, trying to read his intentions. His expression was open, hopeful even, but not pushy. I'd like that, she said, but I should warn you I'm not an experienced rider. Austin's face broke into a smile. That's all right. I've got a gentle mare that will take care of you. We'll take it slow. After he left, Hannah lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. She knew she should be careful, knew she should keep distance between herself and Austin. But the truth was, she didn't want to. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt drawn to someone, interested in getting to know him better. It was probably foolish. It would likely end in heartache. But lying there in the darkness, Hannah decided that maybe, just maybe, it was worth the risk. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Hannah dressed in the altered green dress, which now fit much better, and braided her hair in a single plait down her back. When she entered the kitchen, Austin was already there, looking freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. "Good morning," he said, his eyes lingering on her for a moment. "Coffee." They ate a quick breakfast, then Austin led her to the barn. The mare he'd mentioned was a pretty bay with a gentle eye and a calm disposition. Austin saddled her with efficient movements, then helped Hannah mount. His hands on her waist were brief and professional, but Hannah felt their warmth through her dress. Austin mounted his own horse, the same one they'd ridden the day before, and they set out across the grassland. The morning air was cool and fresh, scented with sage and earth. Hannah gripped the saddle horn nervously at first, but the mare's smooth gait soon put her at ease. "You're a natural," Austin said, riding alongside her. "Nice posture, good hands." "She's doing all the work," Hannah said, but she was pleased by the compliment. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, climbing into the hills that bordered the ranch's northern edge. From the higher elevation, Hannah could see the full scope of the running queue spread out below them. The main buildings looked small from here, toy-sized, and the cattle were just dark spots against the green grass. "It's beautiful," Hannah breathed. Austin sat easy in his saddle, surveying his land with obvious pride. "Every morning I ride out somewhere different. Every morning I still can't quite believe it's mine, that I built this. You should be proud. It's an incredible achievement. Sometimes I wonder if it's enough, though." Austin's voice was thoughtful. "I've spent 3 years focused on building, on making the ranch successful. I've sacrificed everything else for it. No social life, no family, nothing but work. And now that it's starting to really thrive, I find myself asking what it's all for. What's the point of building something if you have no one to share it with?" Hannah's breath caught. She knew she should stay silent, should not venture into this conversation. But the morning was so beautiful, and Austin looked so unexpectedly vulnerable, and the words came out before she could stop them. "What would you want to share it with?" Austin turned to look at her, and the intensity in his amber eyes made her pulse quicken. "I never used to think about it much. Marriage seemed like something for later after I'd established myself. But lately, I've been thinking about it more. Thinking about what it would be like to have a partner, someone to build a life with instead of just a ranch." "That's natural," Hannah said carefully. "You're at an age where most men start thinking about settling down. Is that what you think this is? Just age making me restless?" Austin guided his horse closer to hers. "What about you, Hannah? Did you ever think about marriage?" When I was younger, before my mother died, I suppose I assumed I would marry eventually. But after she passed, my father needed me. And then he got sick, and all my energy went into caring for him and trying to keep us afloat financially. There wasn't time for courting or romance. And now, Hannah met his gaze. Now I'm focused on survival, on rebuilding my life from nothing. Romance is a luxury I can't afford. What if it wasn't a luxury? Austin said quietly. What if it was just another kind of survival? Two people combining their strengths, their resources, their lives. Hannah's heart was pounding now. Austin, what are you saying? He looked away, out over his land, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough. I'm saying that when I saw you behind that general store, bleeding hands braiding rope for pennies, something in me recognized something in you. Strength, determination, pride despite circumstances. I told myself I was offering you a job because I needed the rope work. And that's true, I do, but it's not the whole truth. What's the whole truth? Hannah's voice was barely a whisper. Austin looked back at her, and the emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. The whole truth is that I wanted you here. Not just your skills, but you. I wanted to know you, to spend time with you. I wanted to see if what I felt in that first meeting was real or just my imagination. And is it? Real, I mean. More real than anything I've felt before. Austin reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. His was warm and calloused, strong and gentle at once. I know it's too fast. I know you have every reason to be cautious. But I also know that life is short and uncertain, and when you find something that feels right, you should at least be honest about it. Hannah stared at their joined hands, her mind whirling. Everything he was saying aligned with feelings she'd been trying to suppress, trying to tell herself were impossible or inappropriate. But hearing him voice them made her realize how much she'd wanted to hear exactly these words. I'm afraid, she admitted. I've lost so much already. My mother, my father, my home, my security. What if I let myself feel something for you and then lose that too? Austin squeezed her hand gently. That's a risk both of us would be taking. I could lose you just as easily as you could lose me. But Hannah, isn't the alternative worse? Going through life protecting yourself so carefully that you never really live at all. She thought about that, about the years spent caring for her father while her own life passed her by. About the months of grinding poverty and loneliness in Clifton. About the way she'd taught herself not to hope, not to want, because wanting only led to disappointment. I don't know how to do this, she said finally. I don't know how to let someone in. Then we'll figure it out together. No rush, no pressure. Just two people getting to know each other and seeing where it leads. Austin smiled, and it transformed his face from handsome to something that made Hannah's chest ache. What do you say, Hannah Calloway? Will you give us a chance? Hannah thought about braiding rope behind the general store, thought about the loneliness and desperation that had become her normal state. Then she thought about the past 2 days, about feeling safe and valued and seen. She thought about Austin's hands helping her onto his horse, about the way he looked at her work with genuine appreciation, about the respect in his voice when he talked to her. Yes, she said, and felt something tight in her chest loosen. Yes, I'll give us a chance. Austin's smile grew, bright and joyful. Thank goodness. I was terrified you were going to say no, and then we'd have to spend the next however many months working together with this awkward tension between us. Hannah laughed, surprised by the sound. When was the last time she'd laughed? I thought about saying no. It would be the practical thing to do. When has practicality ever led to happiness? Austin released her hand reluctantly and turned his horse. Come on, I want to show you the creek before we head back. They rode down into a small valley where a stream ran over smooth stones, creating a pleasant burbling sound. Trees grew along the banks, their leaves rustling in the breeze. It was a peaceful spot, almost magical in its beauty. Austin dismounted and helped Hannah down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. They stood close together, and Hannah was aware of every inch of space between them, of the way the sunlight caught the gold in his eyes. "I come here when I need to think," Austin said. "It's the prettiest spot on the ranch, I think, private too. The hands know not to bother me when I'm here. It's lovely." Hannah walked to the water's edge and knelt, trailing her fingers in the cool water. "Thank you for sharing it with me." Austin settled onto a large rock nearby. "Hannah, I want you to know something. When I said I wanted to get to know you, I meant it. I want to hear about your life, your dreams, what you think about. I don't just want to court you or win you over. I want to actually know who you are." Hannah sat back on her heels, considering. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Start anywhere." So Hannah did. She told him about her childhood, about her mother who had been gentle and artistic, who had painted beautiful pictures despite having no formal training. She told him about her father, about his fierce pride and his determination to provide for his family, about how the consumption had slowly stolen his vitality until he was a shell of the man he'd been. She told him about the lonely months after his death, about the fear and hunger and desperate attempts to survive. Austin listened without interruption, his attention complete and focused. When she finished, he said quietly, "You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. Most people would have given up or compromised themselves, but you kept going, kept working, kept your integrity intact. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. You chose dignity over desperation. That says everything about your character." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. "Tell me about you now. It's only fair." Austin talked about growing up poor, about following his father from ranch to ranch, about learning to ride before he could properly walk. He talked about his mother dying when he was 8, about his father raising him alone while working brutal hours. He talked about the dream of owning his own land that had sustained him through years of saving and sacrifice. "My father died just before I bought this place," Austin said. "He never got to see it. That's my one regret. That he worked so hard to help me save for this dream and he didn't live to see it realized." "He knew, though," Hannah said with certainty. "He knew you would do it. That must have been a comfort to him." Austin smiled sadly. "I hope so. I think about him every day, about what he sacrificed for me. It makes me want to make this ranch everything it can be to honor his memory." They talked for over an hour, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Hannah felt something unfurling inside her, something that had been tightly closed for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Hope, maybe, or possibility. The sense that her life might become more than just survival. When they finally rode back to the ranch, the sun was high and the day was growing warm. Austin helped Hannah dismount at the barn, and this time his hands definitely lingered, his thumbs brushing gentle circles at her waist before he released her. "Thank you for today," he said. "For the conversation, for trusting me with your story. Thank you for asking." Hannah stepped back reluctantly. "I should go help Mrs. Rodriguez with lunch, and I should check on the hands, make sure everything's running smoothly." But Austin didn't move and neither did Hannah. They stood there, caught in a moment that felt significant, weighted with possibility. Finally, Austin reached up and tucked a stray strand of hair behind Hannah's ear, his fingers gentle against her skin. "I'm really glad you said yes, Hannah, to all of it. The job, the chance, everything." "So am I," Hannah whispered. The next weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Hannah spent her days in the workroom, creating rope and leather goods that quickly earned praise from the ranch hands. Her work was meticulous and strong, and word began to spread. Soon Austin was fielding requests from neighboring ranchers who wanted to buy her work. "You could start a real business," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. This had become their habit, spending an hour or so in the cool evening air, talking about their days and their thoughts. "I could help you set it up, handle the business side while you focus on the craft." Hannah considered the idea. "Would that interfere with your ranch work?" "Not if we're smart about it. You could take orders one day a week, deliver finished goods another day. The rest of the time you work for the ranch. Think of it as diversifying our income." He paused. "Our income. Is that presumptuous of me?" Hannah looked at him in the fading light. Over the past weeks, their connection had deepened steadily. They'd gone on more rides together, exploring different parts of the ranch. They'd talked for hours about everything and nothing. Austin had been patient and respectful, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, but his feelings were clear in every look and gesture. "Not presumptuous," she said carefully, "but perhaps premature. We've known each other less than a month, Austin. I know. And I'm not trying to rush you, but I also don't see the point in pretending I don't have intentions where you're concerned. I want a future with you, Hannah. I want to build something together, not just this ranch, but a life, a family." Hannah's heart clenched. "You want children? Someday, yes. Don't you?" She tried not to think about children, about the family she'd always assumed she'd have someday before life had derailed those plans. "I do, or I did. I'm not sure anymore what's possible." Austin reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Everything's possible. That's what I'm learning from you. A month ago you were braiding rope for pennies with no prospects and no future. Now look at you, thriving, building a reputation, full of life again. If that can happen in a month, imagine what could happen in a year or a lifetime. You make it sound so simple." "It is simple. Not easy maybe, but simple. I care about you. You care about me. We're both adults with shared goals and compatible temperaments. Why overcomplicate it?" Hannah laughed. "Because life has taught me that things are always more complicated than they seem." "Then maybe it's time life taught you something different." Austin brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Let me show you that not everything ends in loss and disappointment. Let me show you what it's like to be cherished." The word hung in the air between them, sweet and terrifying. Cherished. When was the last time Hannah had felt cherished? Her father had loved her, certainly, but his illness had consumed everything, leaving no room for gentleness or romance. Before that, her mother had cherished her, but she'd been so young when her mother died that the memories were hazy. "I don't know if I remember how," she admitted quietly. "Then we'll learn together." Austin released her hand and stood, pulling her up with him. "Dance with me." "What?" "Austin, there's no music." "Don't need music, just need you." He pulled her into his arms, one hand at her waist and the other holding hers. He began to sway gently, humming a tune she didn't recognize. Hannah laughed but followed his lead, letting him guide her in the small space of the porch. His hand was warm and solid at her waist, and being this close to him made her pulse quicken. She could smell his scent, that mixture of leather and sage that she'd come to associate with safety and comfort. "See," Austin said, smiling down at her. "Not so complicated. Just two people moving together, finding their rhythm." "Is this a metaphor?" Hannah asked, unable to keep the smile from her face. "Maybe. Is it working?" Hannah rested her head against his shoulder, letting herself relax into his embrace. "Maybe it is." They swayed together in the gathering darkness, and Hannah felt something shift inside her, some final resistance crumbling. She'd been so afraid of wanting anything, so certain that wanting would only lead to loss. But standing here in Austin's arms, she realized that not wanting, not hoping, not letting herself feel, that was its own kind of loss. Maybe even worse, because it was a loss she inflicted on herself. "Austin," she said quietly, I'm still afraid. I need you to know that. I'm probably going to be difficult and stubborn and slow to trust. I know, that's okay. But I also want this, want you, want us." She pulled back enough to look up at him. "So yes, to whatever you're asking, whatever you're offering, yes." Austin's eyes blazed with emotion. "Hannah." He cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "I'm going to kiss you now, if that's all right." "That's all right," she whispered. His lips met hers gently, carefully, as if she were something precious that might break. The kiss was sweet and tender and full of promise. Hannah's eyes fluttered closed as she melted into it, her hands gripping his shirt to steady herself. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," Austin admitted. "I've wanted you to," Hannah replied, then blushed at her boldness. Austin laughed, pure joy in the sound. "Come here." He pulled her back into his arms, just holding her this time. They stood together on the porch, wrapped in each other in the night, and Hannah felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Peace. Contentment. Hope. Mrs. Rodriguez found them there when she came out to lock up for the night. She took one look at them, smiled knowingly, and went back inside without a word. But the next morning, she hummed cheerfully while making breakfast and kept shooting pleased looks at both Hannah and Austin. The weeks turned into months. Summer faded into autumn, and the ranch work shifted with the seasons. Hannah's reputation as a rope maker grew, and she began taking orders from ranches throughout the territory. Austin helped her set prices and manage the business side, and the extra income proved substantial. But more than the work, Hannah's relationship with Austin deepened. They stole moments together whenever they could. Morning rides before the day's work began. Evening walks through the cooling air. Quiet conversations on the porch that lasted until the stars came out. Austin courted her properly, with flowers picked from the hills and small gifts carved from wood in the evenings. He was patient with her fears and attentive to her needs. Hannah found herself falling in love, really truly in love, for the first time in her life. It terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. Austin's presence became as necessary as breathing. His smile could lift her spirits after a frustrating day. His arms were the safest place she'd ever known. One October evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Austin said, "I want to take you into town tomorrow. There's something I need to do." "What kind of something?" Hannah asked, curious about the nervous energy she sensed in him. "You'll see. Do you trust me? You know I do." They rode into Clifton the next morning, Hannah on her gentle bay mare. She hadn't been back to town since the day Austin had taken her away, and she felt strange returning to the place where she'd been so desperate and alone. But riding beside Austin, dressed in one of the new dresses Mrs. Rodriguez had helped her make, she felt like a different person. Stronger. Happier. Whole. Austin led them to the general store, the same place where Mr. Henderson had bought her rope for pennies. Hannah tensed, memories flooding back, but Austin squeezed her hand reassuringly. They weren't going to the store, she realized. They were going to the jeweler's shop next door. Hannah's heart began to pound as understanding dawned. "Austin, just come with me," he said, dismounting and helping her down. Inside the shop, the jeweler greeted Austin like an old friend. "Mr. Quinlan, good to see you." "Is this the young lady?" "It is." "Hannah, this is Mr. Goldstein. He's been holding something for me." Austin turned to the jeweler. "May I see it?" Mr. Goldstein produced a small box from beneath the counter. Austin opened it and Hannah gasped. Inside was a ring, simple but beautiful, with a small diamond set in a gold band. Austin took the ring from the box and turned to Hannah, his amber eyes serious and full of emotion. I bought this 2 weeks ago. I've been carrying it around, waiting for the right moment. But I realize there is no perfect moment. There's just life and the people we choose to share it with. He took her hand in his. Hannah Calloway, I know we haven't known each other long in terms of time. But I feel like I've known you forever, like I was waiting for you all along without realizing it. You're strong and skilled and beautiful and kind. You make me want to be better, to build something meaningful. You make me believe that this ranch is more than just land and cattle. It's a home. Our home. Hannah's eyes filled with tears as Austin continued. I love you, Hannah. I love your determination and your pride and your gentle hands. I love the way you hum while you work and the way you laugh when I make terrible jokes. I love watching you come alive again, seeing you bloom like a flower after rain. And I want to spend the rest of my life loving you, building with you, growing old with you. Austin dropped to one knee, still holding her hand. You came to my ranch braiding rope to earn pennies. I'm asking you now to braid your life with mine instead. Marry me, Hannah. Be my partner, my wife, the mother of my children. Make the Running Q Ranch into something more than just mine. Make it ours. Hannah was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face. She thought about the woman she'd been when Austin found her, broken and desperate and convinced her life was over. She thought about the woman she was becoming, strong and skilled and loved. She thought about Austin's patience and kindness, about the way he'd given her space to heal while making his intentions clear, about the future they could build together. Yes, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, I'll marry you. Austin's face lit up with pure joy. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply while Mr. Goldstein beamed and wiped his own eyes. When they finally broke apart, Austin pressed his forehead against hers. I'm going to make you happy, Hannah. I promise you that. You already have, she whispered. You gave me back my life. Everything else is just extra. They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, Austin having tied his horse to Hannah's saddle so they could ride together. Hannah kept looking at the ring on her finger, watching it catch the sunlight, marveling at how quickly her life had transformed. Mrs. Rodriguez took one look at Hannah's hand when they arrived and let out a cry of delight. Finally, I've been waiting for you to get around to it, boy. I was starting to think you'd never ask. You knew, Hannah asked. Of course I knew. Everyone knew. That man's been moon-eyed over you since the day he brought you home. Mrs. Rodriguez pulled Hannah into a tight hug. I'm so happy for you both. You'll make a wonderful mistress of this ranch. The ranch hands offered their congratulations when they heard the news. Jack Murphy, the foreman, shook Austin's hand and told Hannah, about time someone made an honest man out of the boss. He's been impossible to live with, all distracted and lovesick. They set the wedding for late November, giving them time to prepare but not so long that the waiting would be torture. Mrs. Rodriguez threw herself into planning with enthusiasm, and Hannah found herself swept up in preparations. They would have a simple ceremony at the ranch with a justice of the peace officiating. The hands would attend, along with a few neighboring ranchers Austin had befriended. Hannah made her own wedding dress, a beautiful cream-colored creation with lace at the collar and cuffs. She worked on it in the evenings, her fingers flying through the familiar motions of sewing while Austin watched, entranced. You could have bought a dress in town, he said one night. I could have, but I wanted to make it myself. I want everything about our wedding to be meaningful, not just expensive. Austin moved behind her chair and rested his hands on her shoulders. Everything about you is meaningful to me. The way you think, the things you value, the choices you make. I'm a lucky man, Hannah. She reached up and covered his hand with hers. I'm the lucky one. 6 months ago I was alone and desperate. Now I'm here with you planning our future. It feels like a miracle. Not a miracle, just two people finding each other at the right time." He bent and kissed the top of her head. "Though I'll admit, the timing was pretty miraculous. If I'd ridden through town an hour later that day, I might have missed you. Someone else might have found you first." Hannah twisted in her chair to look up at him. "But you didn't miss me. You found me, and you offered me not just a job but a new life. And I'm going to spend the rest of my days being grateful for that." Austin pulled her to her feet and into his arms. "No gratitude necessary. Just love me, build this life with me, and that's payment enough." "I do love you," Hannah said, the words coming easier each time. "More than I thought I could love anyone. You make me believe in happy endings." "This isn't an ending," Austin corrected gently. "It's a beginning, our beginning." The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the November sky a brilliant blue. Mrs. Rodriguez had transformed the main room of the house with wild flowers and candles. The ranch hands wore their best clothes, faces scrubbed and hair slicked back. Austin stood near the fireplace in a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable. Hannah dressed in her room with Mrs. Rodriguez's help, her hands shaking as she buttoned the dress she'd made. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back. Her face had filled out with regular meals and her eyes were bright with happiness. Her dark hair was pinned up with small white flowers woven through it. "You're beautiful," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her eyes misty. "Like an angel." "I'm nervous," Hannah admitted. "That's natural. Marriage is a big step, but you're marrying a good man who loves you truly. There's nothing to be nervous about." When Hannah walked into the main room on Mrs. Rodriguez's arm, the assembled guests stood. But Hannah only had eyes for Austin. His face when he saw her was everything she could have hoped for, love and wonder and joy all mixed together. She walked to him on trembling legs, and when she reached his side, he took her hand and whispered, "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves. Austin promised to cherish and protect her, to build a life of meaning and purpose with her, to be her partner in all things. Hannah promised to stand by his side through whatever came, to work beside him toward their shared dreams, to love him with all the strength and devotion she possessed. When the justice of the peace pronounced them husband and wife, Austin kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of their guests. Hannah felt joy bubble up inside her, pure and effervescent. She was married. She was Hannah Quinlan now, mistress of the running queue, partner to a man she loved desperately. The celebration that followed was lively. Mrs. Rodriguez had prepared a feast, and someone produced a fiddle. The ranch hands took turns dancing with the bride, though Austin kept cutting in, unwilling to share her for long. As the evening wore on and the guests began to drift away, Hannah found herself standing on the porch with her new husband, looking out over the land that was now truly theirs. "Happy?" Austin asked, his arm around her waist. "Beyond words," Hannah replied. "Though I keep thinking about that girl braiding rope behind the general store. If someone had told her this was coming, she never would have believed it. Then it's a good thing life surprises us sometimes." Austin turned her in his arms so she faced him. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, on us. Thank you for saying yes." "Thank you for seeing me," Hannah said, "for seeing past the circumstances to who I really was, for offering me not just help but partnership." Austin kissed her softly. "Come on, Mrs. Quinlan. Let's go inside and start our life together properly." Their first night as husband and wife was tender and sweet. Austin was patient and gentle, and Hannah felt safe enough to let down the last of her walls. Afterward, lying in his arms in the bed they would share from now on, she felt complete in a way she never had before. The months that followed were the happiest of Hannah's life. She continued her rope work, now operating a thriving business from the ranch. Orders came in steadily, and her reputation for quality craftsmanship spread throughout the territory. Austin handled the business end, managing orders and deliveries and payments, while Hannah focused on the creative work she loved. But more than the business success, Hannah reveled in being married to Austin. They worked together, ate together, made decisions together. He valued her input on ranch matters, and she relied on his judgment in her business dealings. They were truly partners in every sense of the word. Winter came hard that year, with snow covering the hills and temperatures dropping below freezing. Hannah worried about the cattle, but Austin and his hands worked tirelessly to keep the herd safe. She spent long evenings by the fire, braiding rope and waiting for Austin to come in from the cold. When he did, she would make him hot coffee and help him thaw out, and they would talk about the day's challenges and victories. It was during one of these cozy evenings in late January that Hannah realized she was late. She'd been so busy that she hadn't noticed at first, but as she counted back, she realized it had been nearly 6 weeks. She sat very still, her hands frozen in the middle of a braid as understanding washed over her. She was pregnant. Hannah waited until they were in bed that night to tell Austin. She curled against his side, her heart pounding, and said, "I have something to tell you." "What's that?" Austin's hand stroked her hair absently. "I think I'm going to have a baby." Austin's hand stilled. Then he sat up abruptly, turning to look at her in the dim light from the dying fire. "What?" "Are you sure?" "Not entirely. But I'm late and I feel different. I've been tired and queasy in the mornings. All the signs point to it." A slow smile spread across Austin's face, growing until he was grinning like a madman. "A baby. We're going to have a baby." He pulled Hannah into his arms, holding her tight. "This is wonderful, amazing, perfect." Hannah laughed, relief flooding through her. She hadn't been sure how he would react despite his earlier talk of wanting children. "You're happy." "Happy, Hannah, I'm thrilled, overjoyed." "This is everything I wanted." He pulled back to look at her face. "How do you feel about it?" Hannah considered the question honestly. "Scared, excited, worried about all the things that could go wrong, but mostly just happy. We're going to be parents, Austin. We're going to have a family." Austin kissed her deeply. "I'm going to take such good care of you, you and our baby. I promise you that." True to his word, Austin became almost overbearingly protective once Hannah's pregnancy was confirmed. He wanted her to stop working, but she refused, compromising by reducing her hours and avoiding the heavier work. Mrs. Rodriguez fussed over her, making sure she ate properly and rested enough. The ranch hands treated her like she was made of glass, jumping to help with anything she needed. As spring arrived and Hannah's belly began to swell, she found herself marveling at the changes in her body and her life. A year ago, she'd been alone and desperate, certain her life was over. Now she was married to a man she loved, running a successful business and carrying a child. The transformation was so complete, it sometimes made her dizzy. "What are you thinking about?" Austin asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. He kept one hand on her growing belly, feeling for the baby's movements. "About how different everything is. How impossible this all would have seemed a year ago. Do you ever regret it, taking the chance, marrying me so quickly?" Hannah covered his hand with hers. "Not for a single moment. You saved my life, Austin, and then you made it worth living again." "You saved mine too," Austin said quietly. "I was so focused on building this ranch that I forgot to build a life. You reminded me what really matters. Love, family, partnership. The ranch is just a means to support those things, not an end in itself." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky change colors. Hannah felt the baby move under their joined hands and smiled. Their child, the physical manifestation of their love. She couldn't wait to meet this person, to see whose eyes they would have, whether they would inherit Austin's easy smile or her dark hair. Labor came on a hot August day, fierce and fast. Mrs. Rodriguez sent one of the hands for the doctor in town, while helping Hannah through the contractions. Austin paced frantically outside the bedroom door, ignoring Mrs. Rodriguez's commands to either come in and be useful or go away entirely. The baby arrived just as the sun was setting, a healthy boy with a surprisingly loud voice. The doctor placed him in Hannah's arms, and she stared down at his tiny face in wonder. He had Austin's amber eyes and a shock of dark hair. He was perfect. Austin was allowed in moments later. He approached the bed cautiously, as if afraid he might break something. When he saw his son, tears streamed down his face unchecked. "He's beautiful," Austin whispered. "You're beautiful, both of you. Do you want to hold him?" Hannah asked. Austin took the baby with shaking hands, cradling him against his chest with infinite gentleness. "Hello, son," he said softly. "Welcome to the running queue. We're going to have such adventures together." They named him Arthur after Austin's father. Little Arthur Quinlan was doted on by everyone on the ranch. The hands took turns carving toys for him, and Mrs. Rodriguez knitted enough baby clothes to outfit twins. But most of all, he was loved by his parents, who marveled daily at the miracle they'd created. Hannah returned to her rope work gradually, now with Arthur strapped to her chest or sleeping in a basket nearby. She found that motherhood suited her, that the love she felt for her son was different from but equal to her love for Austin. Her life felt complete in a way it never had before. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Arthur grew into a bright, energetic toddler who loved following his father around the ranch. Hannah's business continued to thrive, and she began teaching rope braiding to other women in the area, creating a small cooperative that provided income for several families. When Arthur was 3, Hannah became pregnant again. This time the baby was a girl they named Abigail, and Austin declared that his family was now perfect. 2 healthy children, a thriving ranch, and a wife he loved more with each passing day. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Austin took Hannah back to the spot by the creek where they'd first really talked. They sat on the same rock, watching their children play in the shallow water under Mrs. Rodriguez's watchful eye. "You remember that first day I saw you?" Austin asked, his arm around Hannah's shoulders. "How could I forget? I was braiding rope for Pennies, convinced my life was over. And I asked you to braid your life with mine instead." Hannah smiled, leaning into his warmth. "Best decision I ever made, saying yes to that." "Best decision I ever made, asking." Austin kissed her temple. "I love you, Hannah Quinlan. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." Hannah watched her children laugh and splash, watched the sun sparkle on the water, felt the solid warmth of her husband beside her. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the rope she used to braid just to survive. Now her life was braided together with Austin's, their individual strands twisted and woven into something stronger than either could be alone. "I love you too," she said. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that." Arthur called out, "Mama, Papa, come look." And they rose together hand in hand to see whatever wonder their son had discovered. As they walked toward their children, Hannah felt grateful for every moment that had led to this one, even the hard ones. Because all of it, the struggle and the pain and the desperate braiding of rope behind a general store, had brought her to Austin, to this life, to this perfect moment. She had braided her life with his, and the rope they'd created together was strong and beautiful and built to last. The Running Q Ranch continued to prosper over the years. Austin's careful management and Hannah's rope business provided steady income, allowing them to expand their holdings and improve their facilities. They built a new barn, upgraded the bunkhouse, and added a room onto the main house to accommodate their growing family. When Arthur was 7 and Abigail was 4, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the baby was another boy they named Henry. Austin joked that they were building their own crew of ranch hands, and Hannah laughingly agreed that their children would certainly never lack for work experience. Arthur showed an early aptitude for ranching, following Austin everywhere and asking endless questions about cattle and horses. Abigail, meanwhile, was fascinated by her mother's rope work and spent hours watching Hannah's hands move through the familiar braiding patterns. By the age of 6, she was creating simple pieces herself, her small fingers surprisingly deft. Henry was the adventurous one, constantly getting into trouble and giving everyone heart attacks with his fearless explorations. Austin said he took after Hannah's hidden wild side, and Hannah protested that she had no such thing, which only made Austin laugh and kiss her. Life on the ranch was busy and full. Hannah's cooperative of rope makers had grown to include a dozen women, all working from their homes and selling through the running Cuticus established business channels. Hannah was proud of what they'd built together, proud that she could help other women support themselves with dignity and fair wages. The territory was changing too. Arizona was pushing for statehood, and civilization was creeping steadily westward. Clifton had grown from a rough frontier town into a more established community with schools and churches and regular law enforcement. The wildest days of the West were fading, replaced by something more settled and structured. But the running queue remained a constant, a place of hard work and simple values. Austin and Hannah raised their children to understand the value of labor, the importance of integrity, and the strength that came from family bonds. They were happy, genuinely happy in a way that never stopped surprising Hannah. On quiet evenings, after the children were in bed and the day's work was done, Hannah and Austin would sit on their porch and talk, just as they had from the beginning. They discussed ranch business and children's milestones and dreams for the future. They held hands and watched the stars and felt grateful for every day they had together. "Sometimes I try to imagine what my life would be like if you hadn't stopped that day," Hannah said one night. "If you'd just ridden past the general store without noticing me." Austin pulled her closer. "I couldn't have ridden past. Something in me recognized you, recognized that you were important even before I knew why. Call it fate or intuition or just dumb luck, but I was meant to find you that day." "Do you believe in fate?" "I believe in choices," Austin said thoughtfully. "I believe I made the right choice in stopping and talking to you and bringing you here, and I believe you made the right choice in saying yes. Everything after that is just us continuing to choose each other day after day." Hannah considered that. "I like that better than fate. It gives us credit for the life we've built. We deserve credit. This didn't just happen to us. We worked for it, fought for it, built it together piece by piece. Just like you braid rope over and under, each strand placed deliberately to create something strong." 20 years after their wedding, Austin and Hannah stood on the porch of a much expanded house and watched their children work. Arthur, now a young man of 22, was running much of the ranch's daily operations under his father's guidance. Abigail, 19 and beautiful, had taken over the rope-making cooperative and expanded it into a territorial enterprise. Henry, 17 and still adventurous, was learning surveying and talking about studying engineering. "We did good," Austin said, his arm around Hannah's waist. Hannah leaned into him, her body fitting against his as perfectly as it had that first night they danced on this porch. They were older now, with silver threading through their hair and lines on their faces, but their love had only deepened with time. "We did very good," she agreed. "3 wonderful children, a successful ranch, a thriving business, more than I ever dreamed possible." Austin turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Do you remember what I said to you that first day, about braiding your life with mine? Of course. Those words changed everything. Look at what we've braided together, Hannah. Not just rope, not just a ranch, but a whole life. A legacy. Something that will outlast us and continue through our children and their children." His amber eyes, still bright despite the years, looked into hers with all the love he'd always shown. "You took a chance on a cowboy with a dream, and we turned that dream into something real and lasting." Hannah reached up and cupped his weathered face in her hands. "You took a chance on a desperate woman braiding rope for pennies. You saw worth in me when I couldn't see it in myself. You gave me everything, Austin. A home, a family, a purpose, love. Everything." "We gave each other everything," Austin corrected gently. "That's what partnership means." They kissed there on the porch, a kiss that held 20 years of love and partnership and shared dreams. When they pulled apart, they saw Arthur watching them from near the barn, a smile on his face. "You two are ridiculous," he called affectionately, "still acting like newlyweds after all these years." "That's because we remember what it's like to choose each other," Austin called back. "Remember that when you find someone worth braiding your life with." Arthur laughed and returned to his work, shaking his head at his parents' romanticism. But Hannah saw the thoughtful look on his face and knew Austin's words had hit home. As evening fell and the family gathered for supper, Hannah looked around the table at the people she loved most in the world. Austin at the head of the table, still commanding respect but always ready with a smile. Arthur, so like his father in temperament and appearance. Abigail, creative and ambitious with Hannah's determination and Austin's charm. Henry, bright and energetic, keeping everyone on their toes, Mrs. Rodriguez, now quite elderly but still presiding over the kitchen with the same iron will, placed the last dish on the table and took her seat. She was family too, had been from the beginning, and Hannah loved her dearly. They held hands around the table while Austin said grace, thanking God for their blessings and asking for continued guidance. Then the evening filled with laughter and conversation, with the comfortable chaos of a family that truly enjoyed each other's company. Later, lying in bed beside Austin, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From desperate poverty to comfortable prosperity, from loneliness to love, from braiding rope to earn pennies to braiding a life that was rich in every way that mattered. "What are you thinking?" Austin asked, a question he'd asked her thousands of times over the years. "I'm thinking that I'm the luckiest woman in Arizona territory," Hannah replied. "I'm thinking that every hard moment I endured before I met you was worth it because it led me to you. I'm thinking that I love you more than I could ever express in words." Austin rolled onto his side to face her, his hand coming up to stroke her cheek. "I'm thinking the exact same thing. Well, except I'm the luckiest man, and I love you more than you love me." Hannah laughed softly. "That's not possible. Want to bet? How would we even measure such a thing?" Austin pretended to consider. "Years of devotion, depth of commitment, number of times we've made each other laugh, by any measure we're even," Hannah said firmly. "We've loved each other equally, completely from the beginning." "Then I guess we both win." Austin kissed her softly. "Good night, my love, my partner, the woman who braided her life with mine and made me the happiest man alive." "Good night, my heart," Hannah whispered back. "Thank you for seeing me, for saving me, for loving me." "Thank you for letting me," Austin replied. They fell asleep as they had for 20 years, wrapped in each other's arms, two lives braided so thoroughly together that neither could imagine existing separately. And if Hannah dreamed that night of sitting behind a general store, bleeding hands braiding rope for pennies, she woke knowing it was just a dream. Her reality was so much better than anything she could have imagined back then. The Running Q Ranch stood strong through the decades, passed down through generations of Quinlans. Austin and Hannah lived to see their grandchildren born and to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by family. They grew old together on the land they loved, their partnership as strong in their final years as it had been in the beginning. When Austin passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Hannah mourned deeply, but without regret. They'd had more than 50 years together, years filled with love and laughter and shared purpose. He'd given her everything he'd promised and more. Hannah lived 3 more years after Austin's death, spending her time teaching her grandchildren the rope braiding that had saved her life so many years ago. She told them stories of their grandfather, of how he'd found her at her lowest point and offered her not just employment but partnership. Of how he'd asked her to braid her life with his, and how that decision had led to everything good in her life. On a warm September evening, surrounded by her children and grandchildren in the house Austin had built, Hannah passed away peacefully. Her last thoughts were of a spring day long ago, when a handsome cowboy with amber eyes had stopped behind a general store and changed her life forever. The Running Q Ranch still stands today, a testament to the partnership of Austin and Hannah Quinlan. And in the family's collection of treasures, preserved carefully through the generations, is a small length of braided rope. A simple thing, made with bleeding hands for pennies, that represents the beginning of a love story that lasted a lifetime and built a legacy that endures still. From desperate poverty to enduring love, from braiding rope for survival to braiding a life of meaning and purpose, from solitude to family. That was Hannah's journey, and it began with a cowboy who saw worth in a struggling woman and offered her not rescue, but partnership. Together, they proved that the strongest rope is braided from 2 lives, twisted and woven together, supporting each other through every challenge and triumph. Their story passed into family legend, told and retold through the generations. And every Quinlan child learned to braid rope, not because they needed to for survival, but because it represented their family's foundation. The simple act of braiding became a symbol of partnership, of 2 strands coming together to create something stronger than either could be alone. That's what Austin and Hannah built together. Not just a ranch or a business or a family, though they built all those things. They built a love that transformed both their lives and created ripples that extended far beyond themselves. They proved that sometimes the most important decision you can make is to stop, to see someone who needs to be seen, and to offer them not pity but partnership. And it all started with rope, braided by bleeding hands for pennies, until a cowboy with vision and a kind heart said the words that changed everything. Braid your life with mine instead. The end.